is Akpan from the University of Johannesburg on how algorithms further epistemic injustice. Take it away.
Thanks, Kathleen. Good morning. I think it's good day, everyone. It's really nice to be here in person, and I wish my colleagues online could join us here. So I will try to sketch a picture of what I'm thinking about. It might not be fully formulated, but I'll give you a sense of how I'm thinking that algorithms further epistemic injustice. And perhaps, let me begin by explaining what algorithms are. By algorithms, I mean a set of instructions for solving some problems step by step. They could be a mathematical process for problem solving and engineering. And beyond computing, you can think of algorithms in a sense of set of rules that precisely defines a sequence of operations. Think of like a cookbook, a recipe. If you do this, put the onions at this time. So that is a very, simple definition of algorithms. But I am concerned with a particular kind of algorithms, what people call machine learning algorithms, which are methodologies and patterns that use some data to come up with novel models with predictive capabilities about the data. There are a sort of algorithms that can generally make reliable decisions. You think of the ones that are used to determine whether certain group of people get medical aid or get insurance or get loan from the bank, or someone is granted a payroll or bail. So that is the sort of algorithms that I'm concerned about. And machine learning algorithms, are often riddled with issues of privacy, public surveillance, transparency, unethical use, discrimination, unfairness, and inequality. And you could group all of this and call it, algorithmic bias. And by algorithmic bias, I mean systemic offsets in algorithmic outputs that unfairly disadvantage or advantage certain people based on certain markers of identity. So my central question, or what I'm trying to find out here, is how should we think of and address algorithmic bias? That is a question that I'm wrestling with here. So what do I aim to do? Traditionally, people think of, I'll get into this, but just to give you a sense, people think of trying to remedy the problem with algorithmic bias, through what I call a technical problem, which is let's make the data set diverse, to accommodate the differences in the tool, in playing this predictive role, do a better job. Other people think of it, let's build a legal framework or regulatory framework that addresses this, and I'll show problems with it. So I want to move away from addressing algorithmic bias from the legal and the technical frameworks. And I want to begin to elucidate, a new form of epistemic injustice. The name here is, I'm not sure what is the right name, but I'm calling it for now homogeneous epistemic injustice. And this will help us make sense of algorithmic bias, not just at the input level, in the sense of data that goes into the building of algorithms, and not just at the level of outputs, what comes out, where it advantages people, but at the level, at the foundational level, think of it as what are the foundations on which this algorithms are about. So I'm going beyond the inputs, which is the data, whether they are diverse or not. I'm going beyond the outputs, what they generate, and I want to look at the foundation. So that is the aim. And I think this is important, if we do it well, we will be able to address the asymmetrical power relations between the North and the South in algorithmic development and use. And we put a standard and saving in knowledge production and use. And we will be able to share that algorithmic bias should be understood and addressed in the first instance, as an epistemological problem. So that is what I'm attempting to do. So instead of thinking of it as perhaps a moral problem, technical problem, let's think of it first as an epistemological problem. So that is what I'm attempting to show. So this is the outline. I've been doing the introduction and the framing, to give a sense of where we are going to. We'll speak very briefly to the existing solutions, the technical and the legal or the regulatory framework. And I will make a case for why this should be understood as an epistemological problem. And then I'll begin to tease out what I think of as homogeneous epistemic injustice that addresses the foundation inputs and the outputs. So let's get to before we get to the existing solutions, I would say that algorithms are pretty useful, and I think we perhaps cannot live without it. It's always been there. It's not a new thing. As I said, in cookbooks, in somebody giving you a direction, signposts, it's always been there. It's just a clean form. Many of you have smartwatches, and they're pretty useful. And they tell us, how we are doing. Or Google Maps. But I'm not concerned with this sort of, as I said, I'm concerned with the ones that can make predictions. I think that one is more interesting and have damning consequences if you do not think about it carefully. So yeah, this is, I think, maybe the philosopher who goes around looking for, for problems. Maybe there's no problem here, but let's see whether there's a problem. So if I did this search a few months ago where I just typed in philosophers, and I think Tracy made a point that if you're in a space where all you see are white men as philosophers, it could create issues with imposter syndrome. But let's, I think that relates here, but I'm not talking about it. But what I want to show here is that with the predictive capabilities of algorithms, it advantages certain kind of people and certain knowledge systems. Like, even if you search best philosophers, the people that would appear would be white now, or, European. And if you do a similar search on best books to read, and these are the results I got, and I didn't see anything, it's not quite diverse. So that is why I think it's important that we think about this. So the technical problem would say, let's make a data set diverse. If the data set are diverse, then the search of philosophers will bring different people. Or the search for different best books to read will bring different books, or diverse books. And it said here that algorithmic bias can be anticipated and overcome in the design of the algorithmic machine. Since the data used in machine learning is what is responsible for the bias. This view is captured by the axiom, garbage in, garbage out. Or, as Mason puts it, bias in, bias out. So let's address it there, and the output will be right. But at least two quick problems with this. I think that algorithmic bias does not begin with a data set that is used to build machine learning algorithms. I think the bias begins in the particular way in which the problem is framed. And the question that's asked, I think it begins there. So if the questions are not asked right, you'll find different data sets that will justify whatever you're trying to do. And I think the second problem here is that algorithmic bias does not begin, I think I've repeated myself there. Okay, let's stick with the first one. I think it's enough for the purposes of the talk, and I'll move to the next framework. So the legal framework is, advocates that with regulatory frameworks, algorithmic bias can be mitigated through laws and policies and maybe standard ways of doing things. Tell the developers that these are things you should pay attention to. And when they are building it, this thing should be part of it, and then we will overcome the problem. And again, the problems with this is that regulations face inaccurate risk assessments, given their focus only on avoiding apparent harms. And I want to say that we could avoid the harms, but they are still unjust. And I can say a bit more about that. And the second problem is that, the regulatory approach is often too rigid in a way that inhibits progress, or too loose in a way that regulations do not save any meaningful process. I think of the case of the Boeing, is it 737, the one that crashed in Ethiopia, and the two sort of Boeing that crashed. And the regulations, they were quite good, and people would argue, even the regulators themselves didn't even know what to look at. But at some points, they allowed it. And it takes time, so we do not want to build something and then it goes to the regulators who might have a sense or not have a sense of what we are doing. So it might be too rigid and it might inhibit progress. So I also think that this will not solve the problem. So why should we think about this as an epistemological problem? I want to draw here from Mittelstadt and co, and they argue that there are 6 ethical concerns that algorithms present. And the 6 here are highlighted in this diagram. The first 3 are what they call epistemic concerns, and the last 3 are what they call normative concerns. And I have, I will show how I've reported their thinking and to serve the purposes that I'm trying to do. So, but very quickly, the problem with inconclusive evidence is that algorithms use data to draw conclusions through an inferential or statistical deep machine learning techniques. And when they do this, they produce probable yet inevitable uncertain knowledge. So we cannot say for sure, that the evidence is conclusive. And inscrutable evidence, is a requirement that the data used or processed to produce evidence should be accessible and comprehensible. In other words, there should be transparency. In many cases of algorithmic building, transparency is a big problem. So that is a problem with inscrutable evidence. And the misguided evidence, talks about algorithms being thought of as neutral and objective and unbiased in a way that mirrors conceptions of core epistemic concepts and ensures that significant epistemologists still maintain the privilege of being the norm. So the 3 concerns, epistemic concerns, focus on the quality of the evidence produced by the algorithm that motivates a particular action. But at the level of the unfair outcomes, it really focuses on the action itself. What are these things doing? What are they generating? And the transformative effects, is that algorithms can help us think of ourselves, can help us transform ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world. They have a transformative effect through, how they impinge on our sense of self. And traceability is like, we are not really sure on where this harm, where harm occurs. We are not sure where to place the harm on, and who should take responsibility. So the arguments that I want to make is that the epistemic concerns, are what yield, normative concerns. So I'm saying, let's move from the right. If we want to avoid those concerns on the normative side, let's address the epistemic concerns. So let's think of this first as these concerns yielding the normative concerns underpinned by the question of traceability that we should hold seriously on, how do we debunk or debug and make transparent and who is responsible for this. So this is, in a sense, what I'm arguing for, why this should be thought of as an epistemological problem. So having said that, if you return to our book example, you could think of this as an unfair outcome, that have come about. And, the evidence that have yielded this, inscrutable and inconclusive and all of that. But I say here, that these things do not need to be in a particular way. Search engine intentionally and unintentionally share what knowledge is easiest to find, sometimes with unexpected results. as some sources of knowledge are de-emphasized or even hidden. So what does this mean? It calls on us to be mindful of the evidence that informs, algorithmic developments. That it's not either or. It's not like there is one way of doing this thing. There's one way of building algorithms. But I say in every stage of algorithmic development, there are always options, and whatever option we go with, sometimes it's influenced by the predominant worldview and the predominant epistemology that Wells' power. So if this is the case, I want to argue that algorithms in its current belt, in its current form, extends colonialism. It relies on Western epistemic frameworks that sells itself as neutral, dispassionate, disembodied, and branded as a view from nowhere, hence capturing reality as it is. And the construction of algorithms is informed by the imperative, to make profits. So it's really driven by profits, and there is standardization and uniformity, and there is no regard for local customs and local ways of knowing or ways of being. So if this is the problem, then I think this diagram, shows what I'm trying to do. To say, think of this as 3 layers. At the top, the uppermost layer is the output, what we see, when we search, when algorithms produce a result. And the technical fix and the moral fix attempts to solve the problem, not at the root cause level, but at a more, I don't know what, perhaps midpoint. So, but I want to say, let's address this problem at the root level. What is the root cause of these bias? It's the epistemology. It's the ways of thinking that informs how algorithms are built. So let's dig deeper. So rather than just focusing on the outputs, the results, or the inputs, let's build a better foundation for this. So if algorithms, in its current form, sustains and perpetuates and gives room for Western epistemic frameworks to circulate, then I argue that they perpetuate a particular form of epistemic injustice, what I call homogeneous epistemic injustice. And there are 3 key features of this. One is that the standards of knowledge is set by the West. And the West, in most cases, arrogates to themselves an unearned epistemic authority to set standards and conditions for knowledge. And Eurocentric thinking and worldview perverts and infuses many dimensions of life, from politics to religion to sports and entertainment. And it's owing to the history of colonialism that not only equated its project with civilization, but also became the biased judge of what counts as knowledge, often through very violent means that included many epistemic studies. So that is the first, way that I'm thinking of this homogeneous epistemic injustice. The second way is the pressure for conformity. Here, the dominant Western knowledge framework pressures or demands that marginal epistemologies conform to their rules, so to gain approval and validation. And what I mean here, if you think of the big tech firms, and their orientation towards profits, and collecting data and storing in cloud, that data needs to be standardized, and needs to be in uniform way so that it can be used to make predictions and hence make profits. And even, it doesn't matter where you operate in the world, you need to follow a particular model of doing things. So there's a real, and if you want to benefit from this, you need to conform. So there's a pressure for conformity. And the third is the distortion of marginal epistemologies. The dominant framework distorts, silences, and suppresses marginal epistemologies by interpreting the epistemic resources of non-dominantly situated people through the dominant lens. Again, as I said earlier, that there is at no stage of algorithmic development is a singular option of how to go. There are multiple options that could be taken, and the claim to there being an objective design path, I think, is false. And when you try to fit everything into that one objective linear path, I think it distorts the other epistemologies. And I think this is central to what the bias that algorithms cause. So if I'm to think of why I'm advocating for this sort of injustice and not this homogeneous epistemic injustice rather than the other forms, and how it fits into my projects, think of an example of I went on a walk this morning, I kicked my leg on the stone, and I said to myself, oh, I'm kicking the stone, I kicked the stone because my ancestors are saying something to me. It has a communicative dimension. They are communicating something to me. And in the testimonial injustice case, they'll make that example. Perhaps my testimony will not be believed. They were like, we do not believe that you kick a stone. That testimony is dismissed. Or we do not believe that the ancestors are interested in you or telling you anything interesting. And how this shows up in the realm of algorithms is the individualization of data, where individuals are, almost made invisible through profiling. I will not get into what profiling is, but simply I think it's just about finding commonalities among the data set and building profiles. Like, okay, this is what this profile is saying. So the individual facts of persons are rendered insignificant. And if we go back to my example of the stone, the hermeneutical injustice, I might not have the epistemic resources to make sense of that example. And in the realm of algorithms, I think this manifests in a sense of the black box experience, where there's lack of transparency. I know what my Apple Watch is doing, but I can't explain the processes that can go into the result that I see. So there is real lack of transparency. And the contributory injustice, again, the stone example, I kick a stone, so what? It's not relevant knowledge, or your ancestors and so on. And I think at this level of the contributory homogeneous injustice is what I'm interested in. In the epistemic realm or in the algorithmic realm, it's not allowing other epistemic frameworks to contribute to the building of algorithms. And the homogeneous injustice, yes, you kick your leg on the stone, but let's interpret it. We offer a different interpretation given the dominant worldview, so that my experiences make sense or interpreted in a different way. And I'm saying here, in the algorithmic sense, it is multi-layered. It affects the outputs, the inputs, and the conceptual underpinnings through which claims of neutrality and objectivity are made. And I'm moving beyond the testimonial and the hermeneutical, because one might say, I want to maintain that marginal people are, particularly affected by algorithmic bias. But if we stick at the level of testimonial and hermeneutical injustice, then it opens room for everyone, to be victims of this. Because I think equally a lot of white people do not know what goes into the making of algorithms. So they also face the effect of this individualization. So, but if we move to the level of the contributory and homogeneous injustice, then we begin to see how this could affect a particular group of people, and becomes a bit more, structural rather than just looking at the individual. So that is a sense that I have of what this homogeneous injustice could be next. So again, this is the diagram I showed before, but in a different way. So if you think of the algorithmic bias, it shows up at the middle level, or the inputs. We make sense of it as an homogeneous epistemic injustice. It calls on us to think of a new epistemic framework that will inform the building of algorithms. And so this is, there's this title here. Yeah. So
drop it to the bottom.
Yeah. So I'm just signaling what the solution might be there, but I'm not guiding. So you might say, okay, your story is compelling or not compelling. So what do we do? How do we do the legal problem or the legal solution and the technical solution does not work? So I want to say, let's think of a new framework that can inform things like, okay, what is data? What is objectivity? What does it mean to anonymize data and move beyond the input level? And I think if we have a new epistemic framework, then the outputs will be right. Or we have a good epistemic framework, then to yield good outputs. And we will overcome the problem with homogeneous epistemic injustice. So in conclusion, I'll just rehearse what I've attempted to do, saying that the legal and the technical solutions are inadequate. They do not address the root causes of algorithmic bias. The algorithmic bias should be understood and addressed in the first instance as an epistemological problem, and that homogeneous injustice is more dangerous and insidious than other forms of epistemic injustice. For it could allow the experiences of marginalized groups to be adopted, but that adoption is framed and interpreted in a dominant light. And I think it's more dangerous than other forms of epistemic injustice, where things might be very clear. So that is my intuitions around this thing, and I would really like your contributions and questions. Thank you.